As somebody pointed out in the third row, said, were you here 40 years ago? And the answer to that question is yes. I actually graduated from K-State in 1986. This was my first duty station working for NRCS. And so I retired from NRCS back at the end of 2020. Prior to that, I worked in Clay County, Morris County, Harper County, and then Southeast Kansas. Eventually became the state rangeland specialist for NRCS, and then went to our national office the last 4 years of my career before I retired. And I am not Doug Spencer. Doug, I met with Doug, or I picked up some books from Doug this morning. Doug is now the state grazing land specialist for NRCS. And as you know, they've been in a, I guess now, record book, lockdown, shut down, can't get into the office, can't get a lot of different things. But he did have some handouts that those little pocket guides, we'll talk a little bit more about those and kind of where they've come from, what they have in them, how you can use them and see things differently maybe than what you would have or have in the past. And so with that, we'll just kind of jump in. Again, 40 years ago when I was here, I was noticing something this morning. The first county that I actually worked in was Morris County. And I told Doug I thought I was running behind schedule, and so I didn't stop and take a picture of this. But when I worked in Morris County in 1985, which would exactly been 40 years ago, May is when I showed up here. 40 years ago, there was a meadow west of Council Grove, and Dr. Olson is from that part of the world, and he's probably seen, how many years have you been? 20, so half the time, but seen the progression of woody encroachment across a lot of that landscape through that part of the country. Well, this morning I had the perfect opportunity to take a picture of an area that I had been probably in or worked part of or close to, west of Council Grove, and it was a native meadow that is now completely enclosed with eastern red cedar and every other non-native species like locust and some of the others that have just completely filled. Anyway, there was a horse, and of course the wind is out of the northwest a little bit this morning. This horse was backed up against the highway in the northwest corner of that pasture, looking into that mess of trees, and it was like, oh my gosh, I don't have anything to eat, or I'm too afraid to go in there for what else might be there to begin with. And I should have taken a picture of that to use in presentations going forward. But we're going to talk a little bit about woody encroachment. Certainly there's going to be some other speakers here, and Nick Barney from Woodson County is going to also talk to you today a little bit about maybe what happened in that county a little bit earlier this year. If you notice, the kind of the heading of this presentation is seeing grasslands through a refined lens. And I don't know, Jessica, will any of those lights dim? Can everybody see that well enough in the back?
Do you need me to turn the light off there? Yeah. Will that be better?
That's perfect. Yeah, perfect. So what we want to really accomplish is, do we notice things? Do we see things? And if so, then what are we seeing? What is it telling us? Every year we have, probably for the last 22 or 23 years, we have grazing workshops across the state. Kansas Grazing Land Coalition, along with some other partners, have had grazing workshops. And we go through the steps and kind of the steps 1, 2, and 3 about doing work on grasslands, on rangelands primarily. And we talk about a lot of different things. Every year we come up with a different topic, if you will, and kind of the theme that rose out of a lot of our discussion between Doug and I in putting this together this last year was seeing it through a refined lens. But what is the land that you manage? What is it telling you? What is it saying to you by what you have done in the past and maybe what is happening out there? What is it telling you? And maybe, for some of us, are we hearing it? Are we understanding the changes that are happening for the good or the bad? So normally as technology becomes a problem, This worked 25 minutes ago. We'll back out and come back in. No, I don't want to ask the AI assistant. There we go. I may have to manually do it, but that'll be all right. So if you read this heading from John Ernest Weaver, written clear back in 1954, it says, "Nature is an open book for those who care to read. Each grass-covered hillside is a page on which is written the history of the past, conditions of the present, and it's giving you a view of what is changing, what is happening, the direction that it is going." And this is a little bit different. In the past, we would have looked at rangeland and compared it historically to pre-European influence, and we still do that. We still look backwards to understand where we are actually going. But we used to think that plant communities kind of moved in a very linear fashion. And what we do know now is that they're constantly changing. And we can tell from the things that we have done in the past that we have recorded through time, predicting then what is going to happen to those plant communities if we don't alter or adjust to those things that are happening. Some see without understanding, but let us look closely and understandingly and act wisely and in time. So before it's too late, if you will, bring our methods of land use and conservation activities into close harmony with the dictates of nature. Wrong direction. All right. So one of the things that has developed over the last decade in time, and really probably over the last 5 or 6 years, is, and you can, if you want to, and I think it may be also on those pocket guides too, but you can actually go into this device or this model, if you will, called Rangeland Analysis Platform, the Landscape Explorer, and you can look at time changes of vegetation. And there's a really cool device in there where you can drag a cursor across old imagery into what present imagery looks like, and you can see the progression of woody encroachment across the landscape. So 1954, we see up there in the very corner, may not show up on here. Very good. All right. So here's an old farmstead, if you will, that had a windbreak planted around it. You can see from that farmstead, even down the draw, eventually some of those trees escaped where they had been planted from, to almost 70 years later, that complete quarter of ground now completely enclosed with trees. How could it happen that quickly? What is the rate of progression? Is it exponential? Just exactly what's going on is always an interesting question. So when we look at, and again, kind of go back to the idea of what is our land telling us, and are we listening? It reflects a lot of what we are doing is really the driver of what is happening out there, or maybe what we are not doing that is the driver of what is happening. So when we look at two different examples here, we've got all these seed-producing trees that are impacting not only the way it is being grazed, but the kind of plant community that is involved within that area that we're managing. When you look at just the use of fire, we can see that there is greatly difference in what would be a successful burn, and to minimize the impact of these trees or even keep those trees out of that landscape. So we are the author out there. We are the ones that is driving the boat. So there's three primary drivers when we look at rangelands in general. Not necessarily pasture land, which would be described maybe as something like fescue or brome. But when we look at native grasses, through time, there's three primary drivers. Historically, we know this to be the case that bison and elk and large herds of ungulates moved across this landscape. So herbivory or grazing was one key component of that. When we take grazing out of the scenario, And sometimes, a very naturalist approach is I'm just going to let it go back to nature. I guarantee you it will. And trees will be a part of it. So grazing and tree components go hand in hand together. But grazing is one of those resources, one of those natural disturbances that has to be a part of the scenario. The next one then would be fire. We know that in this part of the state and in all parts of Kansas, fire has a history. In the western part, maybe not as frequent. In the eastern part, more frequent. And a lot of times, even today, we'll see in the area where KC lives and I live, that rangeland is burned annually. Where Nick is from, in Woodson County, annually burned, but it doesn't necessarily always solve all of the woody component issue as well. But when areas are fire starved, in other words, they haven't been burned for many, many years, then they become a problem. And the proximity of that to properties that are undefendable, it becomes an issue. Eastern red cedar is something that has, and a lot of this work that has been done by the University of Nebraska has really been focused on eastern red cedar. I remember years ago, I think back in the 70s, Oklahoma was saying that they were losing an eastern red cedar that was getting at least 4 inches in diameter at breast high, they were losing 760 acres a day to eastern red cedar. And we thought, well, that's a long way. It's not Kansas. Well, we're there. We're there in a large part. If you come down the hill on 177 into Manhattan, or even today as I came up through 77 along Junction City, we're losing rangeland at a pretty rapid pace to the expansion of eastern red cedar. So fire is part of eastern red cedar. How do you kill an eastern red cedar? Cut it off below its lowest green branch, it's done. When it's little, how's the easiest, most economic way of killing it? Fire. And that requires you then to manage maybe in a different way than what you have in the past, to become familiar, comfortable, and a user of prescribed burning. And that's something that we have in a large part of the state. We have either not moved that fire culture into that, or we've lost that a fear of fire. Fragmentation makes a difference in how fire has been used. Kristen over here, she writes burn plans, has for several years. And the amount of fragmentation, the amount of boundaries that you have to deal with to try to put a fire on the ground and control it within a prescription area becomes a challenge the more fragmented that it becomes. And so we've seen a lot of areas in the state develop prescribed burn associations where they have a group of individuals that can come together and burn larger scale properties more safely. And so that's a big thing that has happened more so in the central and in the western part of the state, not so much in the eastern part. And then the last thing that we can't control, but we certainly do have to understand, is what role weather plays from one year to the next. We know that historically droughts were a lot longer, or that have been a lot longer through time. We get really worried when it doesn't rain for a few weeks or a few months. We know that some droughts have occurred over 20 or 30 years. And so weather plays a role. We have temperate areas here, but we also have these types of storms that produce. And so it goes back to a history of fire, produced lightning, which ignited fuel, and we had fires more naturally. And we've restricted that. And large part, a lot of our native prairies in the state of Kansas are fire starved. And you can see communities like Medicine Lodge, Coldwater, and even in something that we didn't think was possible, even close to Yates Center last year, that fire-starved plant communities become an issue for public safety and health. So we have to understand what weather, fire, and herbivory do to the whole component and what it means to woody expansion. So we look at the properties again, and I won't spend too much time on this, but as we study what it does, and I want you to think about this from the woody encroachment side of it. How does woody encroachment affect the water cycle? Any idea? in relative maybe comparison to something that is all native grass is functioning in a very healthy way historically, water getting into that profile, capturing that, whether that be by rainfall or snow, compared to when it is occupied by trees. You know, I think we've talked a lot about water quality. I think in the state of Kansas and a large part of the country, water quantity is going to become a reality for a lot of us. The amount of water that trees use in comparison to, or the amount of water that is shed because of their occupation in that space, makes a huge difference in how much water we actually get into the soil. And so that's another big part of it. The biotic community, that those individuals that are not only growing above ground but below ground, how they function with one another, the nutrient cycling that happens as a part of that. We talk a lot about carbon storage. In comparison to woody areas, our grasslands are extremely efficient. Why do you think we have dark black soil? Because they've stored carbon for thousands of years. Those grassland plant communities have stored carbon for thousands of years, with fire also being a part of that. Okay, so the carbon storage, very safe way to get that carbon out of the air, stored into the grassland, into that soil. So a lot of us have maybe kind of confused the definition of what a grassland is in the past, and it doesn't happen just overnight. I mean, it's been a gradual process. When we see a tree out there, we think, well, it's not very big, and next year it's another foot taller. Well, it's not changed much. So we don't see that gradual process happen. But for the most part, grasslands and what they should have been, which I think is always interesting to look at old pictures. I don't know if you're like that. I grew up in east central Kansas, right on the eastern edge of the Flint Hills, and we have a tree problem where I'm at today. But my father-in-law, my wife was from down around Fort Scott, and my father-in-law was always a storyteller, and I could never tell. I was young, was in love with his daughter. I couldn't ever tell whether those stories were always right or true or whatever, but he always told me a story about the Bloody Benders. Has anybody ever heard that story from Parsons, Kansas? Southeast Kansas people have. There was a family there. There was a trail that went through that part of the country, and people would stop there for lunch, and they backed them up to a curtain that closed the kitchen, and when they were enjoying lunch, they'd whack them over the head with a skillet, rob them, bury them, and that's not the story that I'm trying to get to, but they had a picture of the house. And if anybody's ever been to Parsons, Kansas today, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say when they took a picture of that house, not a tree in the background. Early 1900s, late 1800s, not a tree in the background. So the rate of progression from east to west has been pretty quick. We don't think about our grasslands being tree-free. We think about, well, my cattle need shade. It's a natural part of it. I mean, they're a native tree. Well, they might be native, but they're not native to the locations that they're now occupying. We have a very diverse plant community of not only grasses, but a lot of forbs and legumes. I was talking to Kristen about this. She's trying to establish some pollinators in the habitat that she's managing. And we often don't understand that in a plant community like this, we might have 140 or 150 different species of plants, all interacting with one another, not only above ground, but competing in a very good manner below ground as well. They share a lot of nutrients. So it's important to have a very diverse plant community. When we look at this in the wintertime, you know, it becomes a pretty scenic area. We look at different places around the country, more out into the south central part of the state, where we get these red, heavy iron soils, very, very different than what we see around here. But you get down around the Medicine Lodge, Coldwater area, the Red Hills or the Gyp Hills, if you will, very scenic, different landscapes. Flint Hills, get further west, we start to pick up more of these plateaus. And we know that in the western part of the state, we still see these big, huge vistas out there. But for the most part, a lot of our rangeland in the western part of the state is gone, except for certain areas along maybe the Smoky Hill River and down in the south central part. So we've lost a lot of it. If you've ever read, if you'd like to read, or even can get the audio book, which I would recommend because it's a very long book, authored by the name of Timothy Egan, and it chronicles the Dust Bowl years, and it's called The Worst Hard Time. And there was a documentary made a few years ago, and it was on PBS, a series, but it talks about how that part of the state in southwest Kansas, northwest Oklahoma, southeast Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas were affected by the drought of the 1930s. Not only the physical effects, but the cultural effects, the people that were there. A lot of German descendants lived in that country, but we were losing probably in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 million acres of rangeland in a very short period of time. And so the impact, not only socially, but culturally, but as we look at it in the tall grass region and in other parts of the grasslands in the state of Kansas, historically, a 62% loss. We talk about rainforest being lost. Grasslands are one of the most threatened biomes left in the world. The Worst Hard Time, Timothy Egan, E-G-A-N. So currently in the tall grass region, which you guys are right on kind of the eastern edge of that, a 90% loss. And so grasslands have been threatened, are continuing to be threatened. Used to think that maybe we weren't losing as many lately, but even grasslands or cropland that was planted back to native grasslands, we've seen a conversion pretty high there, even as CRP contracts expire. We look at the benefits that these grasslands provide us. They're pretty substantial. So not only biodiversity, food and fiber, wildlife habitat, there's no argument there what wildlife needs. Water, not only captured but safely stored. And then the amount of carbon that is stored. And we think, well, we can do that, and we talk a lot about that on cropland, but it pales in comparison to what we can do on rangeland. These native plant communities that we're really trying to impact in a positive way. So this report that came out between 2012 and 2020, just in Kansas alone, again, those acres that have been converted, 1.8 million acres in Kansas in an 8-year period. And we've seen that, or 8 or 9 year period, we've seen that when crop prices change or deviate and what can happen in a pretty short period of time. Carbon storage, already talked a little bit about that. The organic carbon, grasslands can lose 20 to 50% of that organic carbon content within a few decades of cultivation. We know that there are different lengths of time that a lot of these areas were farmed, and maybe either then let them go back, something that you might call go back property, or even reseeded. And so depending upon how long they were farmed, how much of that carbon was actually lost. When they do get planted back to native grasses, there is a great potential then to restore carbon as well. But a lot of times by that point, depending on, again, how severely eroded they are, how quickly they can recover, and how quickly they can then, or effectively they can store carbon. So it depends, again, kind of location of where that cultivation risk is, and we all know that as farmers producing on those particular types of soils, what is best to be farmed. We know that in times in the past that sometimes marginal cropland develops out of areas that probably should have never been broken out, and so threat of conversion still exists. Threat of woody encroachment. So we look at, again, this example, and you really see this, and like I said earlier, it doesn't happen overnight, but we can go from this to thinking, well, this is not too bad, and then in just a few years, we're at this point in that infestation and that change, if you will, of what is driving the system. Okay, when we get to this point, The trees are the ones that are making the decisions for us and how we manage that and what they're doing to the landscape. Again, this rangeland analysis platform, go on to your server, Google rangeland analysis platform, a wealth of information that you can look on your own property. You can find your location. You can see how it has changed through time. You can look at production from one year to the next. We use this a lot in writing prescribed burn plans, also in writing prescribed grazing plans. What this device will do, and give you just a little bit of background on this rangeland analysis platform, there's a satellite flying over you every 16 days. And it measures greenness. And it can tell from then clipping studies that individuals like NRCS have done over the last 70 years, where we are clipping vegetation and we record the date, we record the amount that is harvested within a plot. That satellite flies over and sees what it looks like, and now it is converting that imagery to production. So you can see, and you can go back to dry years, you can go back to wet years, you can look and digitize your little property in there. It's a very easy and simple tool, and it'll tell you within probably a couple 100 pounds of what kind of production your place is offering to the livestock that you use, or even to develop a prescribed burn plan, whatever that might look like. It's going to tell you what is happening out there. Pretty slick device. That Rangelands app there, that's the web address, but again, if you Google it, it'll take you right to Rangeland Analysis platform. Shows again this presence and change of what has happened since 1984 to the present, but you can also look at imagery that goes back to as whatever. I think when I was in Clay County, I was always amazed when I looked at some of the old imagery that from like the Morganville area of how the Republican River had moved across the landscape through time. You can see all that in those imageries. And those were back to probably 1940s, 1950s. So they've loaded a lot of that information on there, the satellite imagery that they have today, and you can look and see how the landscape has changed over the last 60 or 70 years. So when did this start to happen? And when I look at, and you look at this red, it doesn't mean that this is entirely trees. What it means in a 30-meter pixel area, though, is that trees are now the dominant vegetative type. They are impacting not only sunlight, but also the amount of water that gets into the soil. And so when we look at how the progression has happened, and remember I said I went to K-State in the 80s, and there was some cedar trees around there. But when we look at where the majority of our issues were, we're really over into the eastern part of the state. Now the yellow are early signals that trees are coming. And so you can see that even clear over in here to the Morris County, down into Greenwood County and Butler County, we're starting to see some pretty good development of trees. Even out here, here's Barber County, up into Reno and Sedgwick County, we're starting to see quite a bit of yellow develop. Fast forward 30 years, and that line now is clear out here past Hayes, where trees are starting to show up. You can look down here again, that Barber County area where we had some really big fires in the last decade. You can see this area around Hutchinson that is now choked full of eastern red cedar, and just pretty much all throughout the eastern half of the state. Flint Hills, thank goodness that fire, even maybe not completely effective fire, has kept some of those areas somewhat free of trees. 30 years of time in that view of woody expansion. More regional example, 1990, and again, this is kind of down in that south central area, but you look at, they're starting to see these signals, and a lot of these are draws, lower positions on the landscape, along these rivers and drainages. We start to see the impact of trees, just a little bit of red in certain areas, and again, moving forward into a 30-year window, we can see that it is completely, all this yellow that was right here now is completely driven by trees. Again, here's that Hutchinson area. This one's interesting. I want to see, look at these 4 pictures and tell me what doesn't make sense.
Going from red to green on the bottom 2.
Yeah. Why do you suppose that is? Where do you suppose that is?
Is that the 4 county fire?
No. Close, though. This is actually down in Barber County. So where the big fire came up there through the Medicine Lodge area, started west of Medicine Lodge, went north, and then expanded. The wind direction changed, had a really strong south wind, and then as it shifted, we had that flame front move north, then that you had a long flame front, the wind shifted to the west and pushed it east. And so burned a lot of trees in that area. A lot of trees. 400 and some thousand acres, I believe, burned in that one. That was small compared to the one, or smaller compared to the one in Comanche County the next year, which almost the entire county burned. Again, another regional example. We can see these areas, again, a lot of drainage. We've got a kind of a topographic area here where we've got drainage going in all different areas or different directions. We see that expansion happening in these draws, and now they are almost completely enclosed that area around it. It won't be long before that central part is completely enclosed with trees as well. So we go out west. We think, well, we don't have an issue out there. We're starting to pick up signals of yellow even in the western part of the state. If you get out in like Decatur County, I did a burn workshop in Decatur County back in February. Cold, cold, cold day. But I was amazed at the number of trees, cedar trees, that in the draws were now moving up into the upland landscape, even in a very far west location. So it's a matter of time. They've expanded greatly. Different landscape positions, different landscape types of soils. Sometimes it's easy to get to them. Sometimes in these areas, chainsaw work is about all we can do. Fire, sometimes we have to really plan for and get the kind of fuel loads that we need. These trees are largely untouchable by fire, though. They're too big. This tree, certainly more susceptible, but a lot of times it comes with challenges of fuel around them that make it difficult. So what we do see some successful communities doing is they'll cut and stuff these trees down on these draws, and then they'll get a fire that goes up through that can do quite a bit of damage to any remaining trees that are there as well. The problem is, and I think, I don't know that we've properly addressed this or understood this completely, but a lot of our areas, if you go down, just for an example, along Mill Creek from Eskridge to Alma, you ever drive that road, KC? There's a tremendously beautiful landscape there with a lot of oaks in those bottoms, but now there's a lot of cedar trees underneath them. And a lot of our really high quality forests are going to be extremely susceptible to fire now pushing through there and killing a lot of those native mass producing trees because of the understory of cedar that is below them. And that's what happened a lot even in the Barber and Comanche County area where we saw oak trees, walnut trees down in the bottoms. It killed everything. It reset the clock probably 100 years when it happened. So trees aren't the only thing that cause us ill will. Casey will probably talk a little bit about a few of these in the next presentation. Teasel is one of the scourges of my country right now. There's 2 different types of teasel. They kind of look a little bit like a thistle, and they are somewhat resistant to some chemical, but we see them spread along roadsides down into draws, and now they have become an issue. Musk thistle. Have anybody seen musk thistle in Clay County? Yeah, when I was here 40 years ago, there was times where it looked like K-State was having a field day in some cropland fields. Musk thistle is an issue. Some of our old world blue stems, I'm not going to talk about that because Casey can talk about that a whole lot more than I. Serratia lespedeza, another plant that has come around and has become quite adept at really finding habitats that it can do quite well in. Really been an issue for probably close to 50 years now. We didn't recognize it maybe as much back then at the beginning, but it is extremely aggressive, very big producer of seed, and it's an issue in every county of the state of Kansas. Used to think it wouldn't grow anything west of a 25-inch rainfall, and we know now that it does. So again, these grasslands threats by a variety of different things. We take fire and grazing out, or we manipulate that in some way. We increase the ability and the severity of the impact in these plant communities. We rely on them for all these things over here, but when we start to push them away from what they were meant to be, we start to really cut into what they offer as a community. So what I want you to do, and we can turn the light back on for just a moment, Jessica. I think I'm going to ask this table to turn around and talk to that table. Introduce yourselves. Pass that around, and I want you to, these are just some facts of what woody encroachment has done, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to look those over, so this table with that table. And things that you might not know of the impact. Laverine had to do this about a month ago or so. Hi, Calvin. How are you? You guys are going to act by yourselves. And you guys can turn around and catch this group behind you. I'm going to actually give you two since you've done this before.
Okay.
So look at those sheets, and I'm going to give you a few minutes, and I want you to kind of give a report back to the group of what you learned about the threats of woody encroachment. Okay, Will, we're going to start in the back. Laverine, are you the spokesperson for that group there? What did you learn, or tell us a little bit about the handouts that you had, what you learned, or if you've already seen some of those, but tell us a little bit about the threat of conversion or threat of woody encroachment there related to your topic.
So I think there can be less native birds or birds that live in grasslands present, which is bad overall for life in general.
Yeah.
So humans and the bird population. And then this one I thought was interesting because I hadn't thought about the fact that there would be increased sediment. So maybe it actually can increase erosion.
Yeah.
Is that true with trees?
Very true.
And also then there's more sediment going into streams.
Yeah.
The presence of water. And then there's decreased groundwater recharge.
Yeah. Very, very good. So the one thing that she said that was very interesting, sometimes we don't think about, but if you look at a lone tree or along a drainage area where cattle congregate and they denude that area of any vegetation, and then you get a heavy rainfall through that area, you're going to see significant soil loss. My wife is a testament to this because, and I hope she's not going to watch this video, but she loves Roundup because I don't do a good enough job of weed eating, so I'll take some of the blame for that. She sprays a ring around a lot of our trees and a lot of different things like that. And I keep saying, honey, it's just, and it's amazing how much soil is lost, and all of a sudden you've got exposed roots. And we're only talking an area that may be 2 or 3 feet in diameter. And so when you take that vegetation off the top of it, it's going to leave. That soil is going to move. So, Kristen, first, go back in time into your past life of working with wildlife and parks, but the impact of trees on native upland birds.
Oh, for sure, yeah. It would shade out our native warm season grasses for sure, and then leave bare dirt, sometimes some invasive, brome encroachment, that kind of thing also.
which then in turn impacts the kind of species that are going to occupy those spaces. Um, one thing that, we started doing some work probably 20 years ago with like a Robel pole and looking at how a bird sees the landscape at 1 meter high and what they then choose because of what impacts their view when they will occupy an area. And some species probably have a greater tolerance, but we know that species like greater prairie chickens and others are going to avoid those areas that are now prone to have trees. And so that loss, and the numbers are pretty staggering about the loss of species and the populations. Everything even from the meadowlark has been a significant decrease. So next table over. What'd you guys have?
Ticks,
Ticks.
out the cedars, how there was, in a closed cedar, it said that it was almost twice as many as an open cedar area.
Yeah.
And if it was open grassland, it was down probably 20–30% less.
Yeah.
On that, and then also the mosquitoes were almost none in the grassland, and in open and closed cedars, they were up above other trees.
Yeah. Very good. Casey, did you ever do any work with insect load on cattle in any kind of woody component?
Couple of different times.
Yeah.
So season of fire can impact the tick load. Ticks seem to retreat to woody draws when you burn uplands, and where your cattle like to go when it's hot, they seek out the trees and the woody draws, and they
Yeah.
get loaded up on ticks.
Yeah.
I noticed that with hunting deer. You hunt deer out of grasslands, and I've seen deer come out of wooded areas that are, their ears are
Folded. Yeah.
folded, and
Yeah.
so you don't see that out in grassland. And I never thought about that.
Yeah. I don't think I ever really noticed it. When I had cows for probably 30 years, and I got a bunch of cows in from Montana, and I did not burn that year. And it was like fresh meat. Those cows, the first couple of weeks they got there, whew, man, they got loaded with ticks. I ended up having to spray. Kev's ears were starting to curl, and even some mature cows, and just from ticks. And so it made a believer out of me, especially with the use of fire, but also where they go to. But next table up, this one.
I guess, this is kind of, it's ironic, I get to sit here. But like, just like the spot fire distances and this, the larger flame length and stuff like that, it's just, the more there is, the bigger they are, the more cedars there is, the more it's gonna be,
Yeah.
We talk about, spot fires 2 miles out off of the cedars, and I was telling guys, that day that the nursing home burnt down there, we were south of Gridley up there on a large grass fire.
Right.
That and came back, and I don't know how familiar you are with Gate Center, but like Blackjack Hill's like 3 miles north of where the fire was. And on the north side of Blackjack Hill, it looks like it's snowing flakes of black, just embers.
Yeah.
They weren't on fire at that point, but they were just falling from the sky. So you don't think about things like that. And we had spot fires all over town that day.
Right.
From that. So just, the bigger they are, the more they are, the more the risk is.
Yeah. Yeah, you put the combination of not only the fuel type, but also the humidity level, the wind. It's crazy how far some of those embers can travel. It makes it undefendable. You just don't have that many people to cover that kind of an area when something like that does happen. Very good. This table.
Our topic was basically just on the woody encroachment loss of rangeland production for forage.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of that same wave that you're watching from the east side to the western portion of the state, just exponential growth.
Yeah.
Loss of that food source for
Yeah.
forage.
I think there's a slide in here that talks a little bit about that here in a moment. But yeah, the amount of production lost, now we're starting to be able to track that with that rangeland analysis platform. When you start to pull those trees out of that, the amount of production that is lost, what that means from a herd size, not only in our area, but even nationally. I think it makes a difference. We know that our herd size nationally is impacted, and it has in the past been by drought a lot of times. Could it be, and I'm just speculating, could it be that our herd size will never be able to reach a potential of where it once was because of woody encroachment now taking some of those areas over? And if you don't like $7 hamburger, then you might have to get used to it. Yeah, you might have to eat the all cedar burger. So. All right, so it's not just, we can kill that light again back there. Kristen, if you want to catch that, or whoever did that, that's. So it's not just an issue for you if you're on the ranch, not just an issue from an agriculture standpoint. It affects the whole community, as you will. Everyone is a part of that. I think in the past we have owned some of the things that we've done, maybe done incorrectly. Even back into the idea of years ago, we thought that unless populations or at least canopies got above 5%, we didn't think they were a problem. Now we know that 5%, if you got seed-bearing trees, it's going to impact an area a lot larger than that. So we kind of missed the target. I don't know if anybody ever watched Evel Knievel jump motorcycles on Saturdays when you were a kid like I did. We kind of underestimated the distance of the cars that we were jumping over. So we ended up, doing a lot of different types of treatments. So we would go in a certain area and maybe treat an area, but still have seed-producing trees around it. And so we just really solved a problem in a little area for a little bit of time. Scattered efforts. And so now we're trying to make that treatment a goal. And we did a lot of times, we chased the problem around. So we have revisited some of those same areas over and over and over again. So the book that you have there in front of you, the little pocket guide, if you will, came from a lot of work, again, done by University of Nebraska and Oklahoma State as well. Great Plains Fire Science. There's a lot of publications over here that talks a little bit about a lot of different things. And so I'd encourage you to grab some of that. But this information is really going back to a lot of research that's been done looking at this encroachment and in recognizing some of the issues and seeing things differently. And I'll go through these pretty quick. But when we look at rangeland, and it's kind of hard to see with the colors around it, but we've got a mature eastern red cedar here, another back here, and these are what we would consider trees that are encroached. They're mature. They're producing seed. So a cedar tree, once it gets to be 7 to 10 years old, it's probably making seed. And that may vary a little bit depending on what soils are growing on. But when they are that size, then they're having an impact on, even though we don't see it maybe as a problem, they're already having an impact on the landscape. These R's represent recruitment, so we've got little trees that are starting to come from seed that is produced by that. One seed producing tree, and this has a lot to do with eastern red cedar, not so much Osage orange or locust, but one seed producing tree exposes 26 acres around it. 90% of that seed will fall within 26 acres, or about a 200 meter area around that. So the intact grassland way off here in the distance that is not having an impact by a seed producing tree. Sometimes in fence lines or property boundaries, it's really hard to be able to do that. Knowing what you've got to defend, though, is really important. We look at this in a little different view here. So we've got all these seed-producing trees back here along a railroad right-of-way. We see this area out here that we've got all these small trees, these little recruited trees. We've got encroachment then all along through this backside, so they're distributing seed. We have to get out here over 200 yards before we have no impact, and we have an intact grassland. And then there's one that's just a little bit out of that. But again, 90% of that seed is going to fall within a certain area. So what is your risk from an exposure standpoint? Again, understanding what these trees will produce. Cedar trees, male and female. You can see the blueberries on them. If you've ever seen pollen coming off a male tree in the spring, it's pretty interesting. It's almost like a red fog coming off of it. And so your direct exposure then really kind of defines what your risk is. And so when you've got seed producing trees, Osage orange here, eastern red cedar here, knowing what the risk is something that you have to understand. So again, these are just some numbers. Per mature tree, eastern red cedar, 1.5 million seeds produced. When you look at the amount, Doug likes to use a number that the amount of seed that can be distributed within that distance of time or distance in space is higher than corn populations that we plant. The other thing that's pretty interesting, again, 6 to 7 years old when they start to produce seed, a robin can pass through 742 seeds a day. And if you've ever seen robins migrate through and you see these robins land out there in swarms and then wonder where those cedar trees came from, that's one of the reasons, one of the paths in which they move. So again, 95% of those seedlings are going to fall within 200 yards, or that's where they're going to end up. 5% out further than that. So that's what we're talking about, intact grasslands or what's being threatened. What's your risk? What we want you to do is to be like Leonardo here, and you see things differently now. And this is how we used to see it. I thought, these trees they're just right here. They're not really a problem. It's pretty confined. Now when we know what the impact area is, what acreage they're covering, it makes us look at it a whole lot differently. So understanding, again, the threat. We start to understand then how we address these things and where are quick wins. A lot of times we'll spend time maybe working on these real heavy infestations when we can get a lot of acres by just cutting a few trees and expanding that core more quickly and defending it more quickly than what we can by spending thousands of dollars. And not that we don't need to do this, but this is where we need to focus first. Make your defendable area larger as quickly as you possibly can. So again, that plan, how do we address that? Again, it includes setting a vision. Fire is certainly a part of that, keeping it maintained, but then understanding what our risks are and trying to get it, to a point to where we're just defending our boundaries. If you can ever get to the point to where you're just defending your boundaries, that's a win. But it takes a lot of scouting to be able to do that annually as well. So the reduced exposure, and this is just kind of a phrase they came up with, prevent seed dispersal into those grasslands. Again, this small seedling from the background provider here. Avoid allowing seedlings to become seed sources. So getting that thing either cut off or burned really quickly before it gets to that level where it's a lot more likely to survive fire. You got to monitor frequently. I'm amazed that I've got cedar trees across a highway on a neighbor, and in a brome field, I bet I cut in a 20-acre brome field, I bet I cut 50 small cedar trees every year. And I didn't see them the year before, so they were small enough, they were below the thatch of the brome, but now they get to be a foot tall, and I see them. And I cut them every year. So that threat remains, but you've got to continually scour those areas and then suppress the problem by eliminating those seed sources. One that's a problem up in this part of the world, and even when you get a little bit further west, locust trees. Once we cut a locust tree down, it almost like it makes it mad. All that seed that's underneath that's been there for years, hard seed, those legumes, that seed lasts a long time. And then all of a sudden now you've got hundreds of little seed or little locust trees out there. And cows. Yeah, Kentucky coffee bean, locust, when they eat those pods in your lots or in a dry lot area where you feed them, the next spring you got small locust trees, legumes coming up out of that. Understanding also that we have a responsibility to manage our rangelands to prevent those opportunities, what that vulnerability looks like. This is an old study from Weaver back in the 50s, where the more that we prune off the top, we reduce the root below. About 2/3 of our production is below ground for what we have on top. And when we reduce that, then we also then start to prune these roots back. and now make that area more susceptible to be invaded by something else. So keeping our grasslands healthy. Also fence lines, we've got to scour those fence lines where those birds sit and occupy. There's a little cedar tree underneath, probably an elm there that has now been deposited. We see that, we think, well, our cows need shade. Look, we've removed the native grass, we've changed it to fescue, and we also make a perch for a tree to begin and to. Now the problem with that is that area is not going to burn. So fire, our natural threat to that eastern red cedar, is now not there. So all the different tools that we've got out there, what is our capability? What is the capacity to do the things we need to do? We can control the herbivory or the grazing. We can also control the application of fire. We can't control the weather. We have to take advantage of when weather provides us opportunities. But here are our tools that we have in the toolbox to try to do something about it. So again, our way of trying to track our success, understand what the problem is. We need to defend and grow those areas, and then again, we need to be able to protect those perimeters once we have our area under control. Doug liked this, I'm not sure, it's not one of Doug's kids, but this ranch has a plan. You have to develop what that looks like for you, and everybody's plan is a little bit unique and different, but it has to be something that works for you. But put your awareness into action. I heard a good quote the other day that says, and it was more talking about Christianity, but we have an impact on everybody and everything every day. And sometimes we use words. Most of the times it's our actions. And so it's not just talking about it, it's actually doing it. And so we have to put those actions into play. Any questions?
Have they done any studies of input on cutting and spraying pastures compared to burning?
In comparison to, in trying to
control woody encroachment by burning, or if you cut and then spray your pastures in the spring, what the difference is?
I will tell you, I'll give you the ecological answer to that because I like to think myself as a purist when it comes to what I would recommend over what I would use as a second alternative. If I can remove any seed producing trees and use a natural disturbance like fire, that's my first choice. And that way you prevent any other or collateral damage, if you will, with chemical. But one of the things that we get too reliant upon is using chemical to substitute for fire, and we take out a lot of the other side of the plant community that is really beneficial to us. And so that's the risk. Now you get into some situations, and Casey will probably talk a little bit about this in a way of, I'm prepping you for this, Casey, Ceretia lespedeza, that fire can be an effective tool for that, but sometimes chemicals are the first go-to. And they may be the only go-to in some situations, depending upon the location and the ability to use fire. But there's no doubt that chemicals are going to have an impact on other species that we want to see in that plant community. So to answer your question, that would be my first choice, would be cut and fire. And then if chemical has to be used, now you may have to use chemical to treat stumps. Let me preface that. But a wholesale use of chemical, I would avoid that if I could.
But a fire ain't gonna get peas-full, and they're not gonna get musk thistle.
Musk thistle, again, and are you going to talk about seasonal burns, Casey? I think sometimes we narrow our window of approach to the use of a certain tool. And certainly and I told Kristen I was going to say something about this, what we are seeing more is growing season fires. And so using fire in a different season may have the opportunity to minimize even the need for chemical in some of those other species. And you're right. Sometimes we have to, but it's been the easy button for us a lot of times. Rather than to manage out of it, we go to the easy button first. That's a great question, though. Anyone else?
My area, we got a lot of blackberry bushes. I mean, they're just coming everywhere. I've had them sprayed with a plane and helicopter boat, and they still don't kill them.
Yeah. Blackberries are a problem where I live as well. We have a little more sand in our soils down there, and blackberries, where Nick's from too, in Woodson County, we have blackberries. And we continually fight them. Prescribed burning in the spring really only delays maturity on them. We get new canes. We kill the above ground, but we get new canes that come up after that. Chemical in the spring months of June has probably been the go-to with that. Casey, have you seen any work done on growing season fire with blackberries though? And I'm talking about August, September timeframe.
At that time of the year, if the fire can get into the understory of the big patch of blackberries, it will eat it alive. It has difficulty coming back to close fire.
Yeah. So again, I think the whole idea of growing season fire makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But I think once you've exposed yourself to it, it requires you to manage differently. But the difficulty in controlling a growing season fire is totally different than a dormant season fire in the spring. Kristen, would you have any comments on that? I mean, are you seeing any growing season fires in the area that you cover?
I am. It's my personal favorite time of year to burn. Even on the grazing side, if you get the moisture, which is always a big gamble, you could even throw your cows out in October and like some fall grazing and short your grazing. So there's some options. But we saw one in Clay County this summer. Got a lot of fuel. We got some big 6 to 8 foot cedars.
Yeah. I will tell you this, that annually spring burning will not get rid of blackberries. You can reverse and set the clock back and you've got new canes coming, but I've never burnt something enough.
When the weeds get up about this tall, time to spray them.
Yeah, right.
I've got a few places where they're not big patches that I can take care of.
Yeah.
You get in big patches, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, they're just.
The only thing that I have seen, and this is just anecdotally, is I used to haul hay as a kid, square bales, and I hauled with a friend of mine whose dad, his philosophy was he'd buy property and he would hay it for about 10 years to help clean it up. And so, but you think about, again, the timeline, probably the 10th to the 20th of July is when he was haying it, probably at a time in which it was doing some damage to those blackberries to be able to recover, a lot like a growing season fire. And he could reduce the cane numbers, by doing that. So I think you got to find what the vulnerability period for that species that you're trying to control is. And then you start to target your management based upon that. Any other questions? I've talked long enough. All right, Jessica, you want to take like a 5 minutes so we can get KC? Okay, so a 5-minute break if you need to use